you all for being here today. My name is Tiffany Kelly, and on behalf of the ATHENA Conference Planning Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to the University of Connecticut School of Nursing's annual ATHENA Scholarship Day. As you see from your program, our theme this year is Innovations and the Scientific Basis of Nursing. We have an exciting day planned for you today, aimed to highlight the many ways in which innovation is present within our nursing profession. Whether through practice, education, research, or leadership, innovation is part of your professional work, and we hope you'll leave today with a few new insights and inspiration as you go forward in your professional endeavors. Before we get started, bringing a day like this together takes an incredible amount of teamwork. Thank you to the ATHENA Planning Committee members who met regularly all year to plan for today. Special thanks to Robin Wayne, who thought and took care of things before we could. Beyond the committee, thank you in advance to our invited speakers, preparing and sharing your knowledge with us today, our poster presenters, with nearly 100 posters across both sessions today, Dean Chun for her vision, all of our faculty and staff, guests here with us today, and our sponsors, Sigma Mu, Connecticut Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and Yukon Ventures in the Office of the Vice President for Research, for helping to make this a special event. With that, I have a few items I'd like to quickly go over. You are welcome to take pictures today, but please do silence your cell phones. Out of courtesy to our speakers, please try not to enter or exit while someone is speaking. I know we have a few getting settled this morning, that's okay. Please wait until their presentation or session is over to exit or return. There'll be time for questions after each presentation, so please hold them until that time. For the juniors and seniors that are here today, please be sure that you've swiped your Husky card on entry and upon exit today to receive credit for your clinical day. And there are a few handouts in your program. I'll explain those later in the morning. Today we are able to offer continuing education credits. This continuing nursing education activity was approved by the Northeast Multi-State Division, an accredited approver by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. Participants must be present for the entirety of the activity for credit. Additionally, each participant must submit an evaluation form for the planning team. If you're interested, please see Robin Wayne during the day for an evaluation. And the learner outcomes for today are to define and describe the many places where innovation may appear within the scholarly work of nurses and nursing science, apply the learnings from today to one's focal areas within the nursing and healthcare field, where a problem may be in need of a solution, and formulate a plan for what to do when a healthcare problem arises and apply the appropriate problem-solving skills to create an appropriate solution or identify the appropriate person within their school of nursing or health center system to help facilitate the next step. Now that we've covered the administrative tasks, I'd like to now turn to something I know we've been excited for months. I'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker today, Dr. Bonnie Clipper. Dr. Clipper is the Vice President of Innovation at the American Nurses Association. She has been practicing for over 30 years, spending more than 20 in leadership and executive nursing roles, transitioning over the past 4 years to focus on innovation. She speaks throughout the country on topics of innovation and emerging technology. Dr. Clipper is a Robert Wood Johnson Executive Nurse Fellow alumni, an ASU AONE Executive Fellow in Health Innovation Leadership, and a Fellow in the American Colleges of Healthcare Executives. Her research interests include building cultures of innovation, importing the voice of the clinician into the design and development of technology, and millennial leadership advancement. Dr. Clipper completed her Doctor of Nursing practice at Texas Tech. She received an MBA from Lewis University, Masters of Arts in Health and Human Service Administration from St. Mary's, and a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Monona State. She has published on the impact of robots on nursing practice, authored the book The Nurse Manager's Guide to an Intergenerational Workforce, and a co-author in the Innovation Roadmap, a guide for nurse leaders. With that, please help me to give a warm welcome to Dr. Bonnie Clipper.
Thank you. It's interesting, having been in this profession for 30 years, whenever you hear things about yourself, certainly, that makes me feel very old and like I have no social life because of spending much too much time in school. So thank you. It's nice to be here with you on this lovely spring day. I guess this is kind of the April showers and May flowers sort of thing. I've spent the last 18 years in Austin, Texas, so we really don't get this kind of thing. I've been in DC for about the last 2 years, so we're starting to get a little of this weather as well. So thank you for being here, appreciate it. All right, we're going to talk a little bit today about different kinds of innovations and giving you a sense of how they impact nursing. The lens that I would like for you to look through and to think about is not only what the innovations are, but how they're going to impact your practice and how they're going to impact you, because things continue to change at a very, very rapid rate. So we're nurses, we like objectives. The objectives today are pretty clear. We're going to cover a few different types of innovation. We're going to talk about some emerging models and roles, and then we're also going to talk about some strategies and ways to mitigate these as well. All right, this is a cool little video. If I can get this guy to work.
Medical dream comes true under the drive of industrialist Henry Kaiser, who holds the plans of the ultra-modern hospital designed by Dr. Sidney Garfield, director of the Kaiser Foundation. From the admissions office on, everything is streamlined and expedited. The patient's record reaches the doctor before he does. This is the last word in the combination X-ray machine and fluoroscope, imported from Holland at a cost of $25,000. Every portion of the body through 180 degrees can be photographed. In the operating room, the first light of its kind is installed. No portion of an operation is ever in shadow, nor is the expectant father forgotten. Here he can get the news officially and suffer under the most comfortable circumstances possible. And for mother, well, she has only to call for her baby, and baby comes sliding through a wall in a drawer like bassinet for her little visit with the new mother. In this $2 million institution, doors are opened by remote control, and on the single floor, patients are easily moved from place to place. Dream grounds for a dream hospital. Answer to a doctor's prayer.
All right, did you catch that? Answer to a doctor's prayer. So what's interesting about that is that was actually done in 1954, and that was innovation at the time. Did you guys catch how much they said the hospital cost? $2 million. So $25,000 was actually the imaging machine. So $2 million, and in 1954, that was innovation, right? You had the pass-through window for the baby to go through. So you had the waiting room where you could smoke your face off. You had all kinds of things, and again, that was innovation. So that kind of helps show you how far and how fast we've come and where we are today. In healthcare, there's actually 3 different types of innovation. There's technology innovation, there's the buying and using of care, and then there's business model innovation. Healthcare innovation is really only one of multiple different types of innovation. There's social innovation, there's product innovation, there's experience innovation, there's technology innovation. Innovation is often a very, very overused term, and there are a multitude of definitions, but when you really think about it, essentially it's doing something differently. It can even be repurposing something old in a new way, but it's bringing value. It's ensuring that you're solving a problem or bringing value. There's incremental innovation and there's disruptive innovation. So we're going to skirt some of these issues today. What I want to start with is to talk a little bit about the influence of technology. So if you think about this, we're really going to plunge in here, starting with AI. So artificial intelligence, it's also known as augmented intelligence. It's really been around since 1948, 1945 even. And essentially what this is the ability that we have to use computers or machines to help us think and to be better humans. How many of you use TripAdvisor or Netflix, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, right? It pretty much touches everybody in here. So when you see ads pop up or when you see articles targeted to you, that's through a variety of different algorithms using AI, and it focuses on what your needs and your interests are. When your needs change and you no longer want to buy Zappos shoes and instead you want to buy them from Rothy's, it will track you and follow you in that direction. So it knows what you want because it begins to anticipate based on your patterns. The same kind of thing happens in healthcare. So when we use AI, we can use it either by itself or we can use it with something like Predictive Analytics, but the influence is huge, and the impact in nursing is going to be very, very substantial for us. If you were to take this a step farther, and if you were to actually jump into something called machine learning, this is where we have the ability to influence how computers learn or how they know what to teach us or what to show us. So for example, if you had a robot is nothing but an agent, right? It's an empty shell, it's kind of a bunch of metal, a bunch of wires. Essentially, if you were to train the robot how to sit, you would need to teach it every single task along the way so that it knew how to sit. So things that we take advantage of as humans, we know these things, right? We know to walk into a room, we know to scan, we know to look for something that's low, we know that we need to back up into it to sit down. Every one of those steps is something that you would actually have to teach a robot. Machine learning. It takes a very long time. You have to test every one of those steps. The robot needs to be able to demonstrate it or replicate it. Then eventually, over hundreds and thousands of attempts, it can walk into a room and sit. It takes a very, very long time. So I have an interesting story about machine learning. I have a son he's 20 years old, studying interactive game design back in Austin. So he took an internship at an AI company. So his job, we often hear that there are jobs that young people are going to get that we don't even know the names of yet. So his job is an annotator. An annotator is the person that does machine learning. So there's a room of 20-year-old kids, and essentially what they're doing is they're drawing boxes or circles around ships. Depending on the width of the ship, the length of the ship, they either get a box or a circle. So he spends hours and hours doing this. The way that they do their work is they're actually sent a file, and he may have to do 1,800 ships. And it takes him days, depending on how lazy or active he is. It might take him more time. And there are several interns that do this. Then they basically submit these back in. So he was working late one night. He likes to go in on Fridays because tech companies give free food on Fridays. So he goes in on Fridays, submits his work. He's there late one night. And a guy said, hey, hey kid, do you know what you're doing? My son says, no, I really don't, right? I'm drawing circles and squares, I have no idea. So the guy said, come to my office. So my son goes to this guy's office, and basically he has several computer screens set up, and there are ships with circles and squares. And he said, you guys are drawing circles and squares around ships because they're merchant vessels or civilian ships, and what that's doing is actually informing smart missiles what not to bomb. So think of that. There are 20-year-old kids that are deciding what is going to be the differentiator between you on a ship that's a cruise vessel and you on something that might get bombed. So that's machine learning. So essentially, they're the ones that are teaching the computers what to do. I don't know that that makes me feel any better, but that's what they're doing. If you were to take that a step farther and you were to focus on deep learning is actually the ability of the computer to learn things such as emotions or feelings, art, music, perceptions. That's even much more difficult than just teaching it how to sit or how to bomb the right kind of ship. One of the things that's going to take a very, very long time is to teach computers about compassion and empathy. Those are primarily the reasons that nurses are not going to be robotized or computerized for a very, very long time. So think about that, because we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. And as we learn more and more about jobs that will become supplemented or replaced by technology, nursing is among one of the very last, if at all. We're going to pivot a little bit and talk about augmented reality. How many of you guys played Pokemon Go? That's it. So really, if I came here, I'd be playing against 6 of you. All right. So Pokemon Go is probably the best example of augmented reality. If you imagine a real world with a supplement, right? Something that augments it. So essentially what makes Pokemon Go unique is that when you look through your phone, you're looking through the camera lens, you're seeing reality, you're seeing the real world, carpet, hallways, a hall. If you you were outside, you would see grass and streets and cars and benches. And then what you'll also see is the supplement of cartoon characters or Pokemon or Pikachu, Powerballs, that are inserted into that world. So it's supplementing the real world. We see this now. One of the most popular ones is actually some of the vein finding technology. If you use kind of infrared technology and augmented reality, you can do a much better job starting an IV, doing phlebotomy, things of that nature. So this is very, very common. This is interesting, and this is actually in the beta phase. So essentially, if we were to take 2D images, like a CAT scan and like an MR, we could overlay them on each other. We could actually stand them up and create something that looks like a hologram. Where they're piloting this kind of work right now is really around brain, so neurosurgery, and also heart surgery, right, cardiovascular surgery. And what they're able to do is that in very, very difficult or delicate surgeries, they're able to determine where is it they want to make incisions or where actually do you want to make tumor dissections. So this technology is emerging, and we're going to see it more and more, and it will be used intraoperatively. So this is pretty cool stuff coming on the scene. Essentially, the maps, the grids, the locators are what make it so precise and actually make it so incredibly helpful. So it's a really neat way to use that. One that's going to impact us even more on the nursing side is certainly virtual reality. It's often overlaid with gaming technology. So what's cool about virtual reality is that when we talk about it, it's virtual. It's a fake world, it's a false world, it's a created world, right? So it's very different than augmented reality. Where this is showing the biggest promise really has to do with immediate post-op pain. And what's so cool about this is when you actually use VR, especially in kind of a gaming modality or multi-sensor, which means eyes and ears, when you're able to do that, what you're doing is that your brain is engaging so much in what's going on from a visual and an auditory perspective that it can't also concentrate on the fact that you're having pain. So it's kind of playing a trick on your brain. So they're seeing a lot of good work happening with pediatric patients in this area, and then also this immediate kind of post-op thing. Imagine how we can reduce opioids in patients that have post-op pain if we didn't have to medicate them at all. So that would be pretty cool. Think of the impact from a nursing perspective. So what are the things that we need to be putting in our care plans? How is it we would educate a patient on VR, whether it's inpatient or when they go home, right? So these are the kind of things that are going to impact us. There's a lot of work being done with chemo administration and wearing VR headsets. So these are the things that we are going to have to understand how to use, how to document, how to train patients on, how to document outcomes. These are the things that absolutely will impact us as nurses. Robotics, this is actually one of my favorite. Even though there are 4 pictures, there are 3 types of robots that we're really seeing in healthcare. So there is a service robot, there is a clinical robot, and then there is kind of this one, actually customer service, clinical, and then just general service. So if you think about it, Pepper, the guy who's holding the iPad, or it that's holding the iPad, essentially they've been used in Japan for almost 10 years. So if you were to go to hotels, you would be greeted by Pepper, who would basically check you in. We're starting to see them emerge in healthcare. They could be used as clinics. They can check patients in. They can validate insurance. So think about patients that are being greeted by this. Now, there's probably, from a demographic perspective, some patients that might receive these better than others. So those of us that have spent more time around computers, iPads, things of that nature, may respond better than perhaps older patients that may be confused or not able to read the screen or to see things. So we really do need to think about the impact of these kind of things as they show up in healthcare. Reba is actually a clinical robot. How many of you guys have had the opportunity to work in a hospital or do a clinical rotation in a hospital that has like a Da Vinci surgical robot in the OR? Okay, so some of you guys have. That was actually one of the first kinds of robots, and those continue to get better and better. And essentially what those are is a robot that allows the surgeon to literally perform surgery from feet away from the patient through console and there's actually little pincher things they put on their fingers to actually control the console, and the robot will be manipulated or work based on how they maneuver their hands. So those have been around since 2002 and continue to get better and better. What Reba does as a clinical bot is basically lifting and moving a patient, so essentially safe patient handling. In Japan, they utilize Reba, and I've actually had a conversation with them. They're not interested in this time in coming to our country. Can you take a guess at why they're not interested in coming here? BMI. So if you think about it, in Japan, a robot is probably bigger than most of the patients. That's a concern for them in this country because they're not sure how they can actually configure it to be safe enough, because they would literally need to make sure the bottom portion of the robot didn't cantilever over a patient. So that's a concern for them. What they use it for in Japan is literally, it can lift a patient out of a bed, out of a chair, stand them upright, sit them down, lie them down. So essentially, it handles the safe patient handling functions. And what it does is it alleviates the risk of human labor, which therefore can eliminate back injury. So it's a force multiplier. It also is a safer way for clinicians, caregivers, nurses to be handling patients. The bottom ones are actually pretty cool. Now, this guy you've probably seen in airports, right? So there are robots that do supermarkets and airports, and essentially they can do mopping, waxing, cleaning, floor cleaning. They also can be utilized to do transport of pharmacy goods, linen, food carts. This one is really pretty cool. So this one is Moxie. Moxie is what's known as a subset of service robots, and Moxie is actually a hunter-gatherer. What Moxie does, you can see there's a little barcode kind of above where Moxie would have eyes on that nice blank face. What Moxie can do is actually scan items in a supply room. And Moxie, you would give Moxie a command. It can go into a supply room, scan barcodes, and essentially it has one arm. It's kind of like a praying mantis a little bit. It's able to articulate that arm and grab and retrieve the item you want. It will recoil the arm, and then it's on wheels, so it will come to where you are and give you the item. So imagine how that changes when we can communicate with Moxie through our smartphones at work or our devices, communication devices. So if you drop something and you need someone to literally fetch it for you, instead of waiting to find a PCT or a CNA to do that, you can use Moxie to just grab it, fetch it, and bring it to you. So Moxie is in 3 trials right now in hospitals in Texas, and they're going to be expanding that this summer. So pretty cool stuff. 3D printing, this is something also that's very, very interesting, and you're going to see it start to creep in more and more into not only healthcare, but we're going to have an impact in nursing that we're going to have to understand. So it's been around for a while now, a couple years at least, is 3D printing on casts, splints, orthotics, prosthetics. That's pretty cool technology. We've been doing it. There's nothing sexy about that anymore. What's cool and what's pretty cutting edge is that we are right now able to replace bones that have been lost either to traumatic injury or to cancer. And these can be printed and customized for a patient. They're doing trials right now with implanting these. And what happens is it's kind of like repopulating a coral reef, right? So we're going to see osteocytes grow on it. And over the course of time, it will essentially replace the bone with new bone. So that's pretty cool technology. So again, we have to think about what's the role of a nurse as we educate patients on that. We have to understand that first before we can begin to educate patients. The bottom one here is pretty cool. They look like they're real, but they're just printed out of a synthetic material. So patients that have appendages that are removed for, typically it's for oncology-related surgery. Again, it can be through traumatic amputation. They can be replaced with some pretty real-looking plastic, synthetic ears, toes, fingers, noses. So that's pretty cool stuff. What I don't have a picture of is really what the cutting-edge technology is right now. And that is that we are printing, 3D printing tubules and nephrons that can be used to essentially create a kidney scaffold that can be implanted in patients so that you don't have to have a renal transplant. That work's being done right now. Actually, Duke is the one that's doing a lot of those pilots. So that work is already being done. Think about what the world looks like when we don't have to do transplants. There's also being some early work that's been done in printing liver scaffolding. So if you can imagine, livers do regenerate. What would it look like if you could print a scaffold, essentially, very much the same as you would put around a building, and put it into a patient to allow healthy liver cells to grow on it and create a new liver. Think of what that means to patients that wouldn't have to take immunosuppressive medications the rest of their life. So that's pretty cool stuff that's happening. We're going to shift a little bit and talk about models of care. So when you think about this, virtual care is going to continue to increase. This is kind of an interesting debate that I would tell you we have, even at the ANA, right? So you guys are going to be graduating and working at a time in healthcare where we're really going to begin to see a transition of roles. We know that we're moving away from acute care facilities. We know that we're seeing a lot more telehealth come on the scene. So this will continue to populate more and more of what we do and more of the jobs that you do. So we know that our consumers are much more comfortable using telehealth. That number is only going to grow. What do you think the fastest growing job is right now in healthcare? You're very quiet. Informatics, that's a good guess. Telehealth, virtual care, nurse practitioners. So for all you guys that are going to be graduating, what you want to do after you graduate is hustle back on and get your graduate degree and become an NP. So these salaries literally are between $150 and $200. So you can make a very good living being a virtual care NP, working from home in your jammies. So these fastest growing jobs. So, yes, okay, so Jamie's got your attention. Think about what this means from a nursing perspective, right? Not only how do we change the way we educate, but what is it that's different for you in your practicing? So these are roles that are going to continue to be very, very dynamic and very different. Patients, how do we educate patients when they might be a state away through an iPad or through a computer monitor? So it really does change the conversations that you have, and it changes how you do it. This absolutely will continue to impact us. And I would also assert nurses have the opportunity to lead in this space. So there are so many of these models right now. There's a couple of them that are very, very popular. There's Teladoc, there is Limeade, Telemedix is pretty good. And then there are a couple, Sensely is one that are real popular. If you actually Google the most popular telehealth apps, it will tell you. Typically what you do is you'll actually download, you get the app. Many of them have a back end that's powered by an insurance company, or in some cases it's an inverted model where it's essentially a telehealth company that has gone out and secured contracts with insurance companies. So you have the ability to use them. We have the ability through our provider at the ANA to use them. So you either, if you're not feeling well and you want to make a doctor's appointment, you can go to an urgent care, you can go to a clinic appointment, or for $10, you can have a telehealth visit. They're pretty awesome. Generally, the way that works is that they typically are managed by NPs and PAs, and depending on the state, there may be a delegation relationship. But NPs are very, very clearly the ones that are filling the space. And it's a great opportunity for nurses to step up. We're also seeing this really roll out more and more in behavioral health and pediatrics. So a good opportunity for nurses to innovate there. This is a really neat thing that we've seen on the scene now for a couple of years, right? So predictive analytics, typically through regression analysis, we're able to predict the future based on patterns and trends. So this is a really cool thing. There are two applications out there that are very strong right now. used for sepsis. So depending on who your EHR provider is, there are a couple of different models out there, and essentially what they do is they actually creep behind the EHR, and what they'll do is they look at a couple different components. There's 3 pieces. They'll look at lab values, they will look at nursing documentation. So essentially, for some of you guys that are in the IT space, they actually look at the translational databases, pulled out keywords in the nursing documentation, not the physician documentation, but the nursing documentation, and then triangulate it. So they look at nurses' notes, they look at lab values, and they look at vital signs. And they are able to predict and detect which patients may end up with a septic episode well before our human eyes and ears can detect that. So what we're able to do is to actually identify patients pre-sepsis before they truly become septic. So this is saving lives. This is powerful, powerful technology, and it's pretty cool. And in my opinion, nurses need to understand how this works, so we become kind of compatible and a supplement with each other in this world, but we can't completely just rely on this technology and give it away, right? We need to understand how it works and where the data comes from and what the data means, because we still have to trust ourselves in this equation as well. Wearables is something that continues to grow as well. I think we're going to see more and more. This tends to be a space that we have a lot of startups, and I would tell you I often have entrepreneurs, startup companies that reach out to me, typically through LinkedIn. Sometimes they get my phone number and they'll call me and they'll talk. And the way this usually starts is, hey, we have a solution that we want to show you. They often aren't starting with the right problem, right? So in this space, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wearables. So you have to really filter through those that are truly going to be of benefit, figure out how we can create a sense of interoperability. In my opinion, it's really not helpful to have a million wearables that don't talk to anything else, right? I think it's just one more piece of data. So there are some really cool ones out there. It's now become kind of passé to actually have the one over here on the left, which is really, it's a glucose monitor that can interface with Bluetooth to your insulin pump. So it's pretty cool. It's not even brand new technology anymore. It's actually a couple years old. This one right here is still pretty new, and what this is actually a dressing, so it would overlay a wound, and there's a microprocessor. You can see the coils. The coils can heat and cool. Then there's these little tubules right here. So they actually blow air to dry, so we can heat, we can cool, or we can dry a wound based on what it detects the conditions under the dressing. That's pretty cool stuff. And again, from a nurse's perspective, so I get to look at this stuff all the time. I have the most fun job at the ANA, so I get to play with gizmos and look at stuff in robots all the time. How does it impact us? That's the real important piece. It's nice to see all this. Like, I was always a fan of the Jetsons, so now I get to go, wow, this is super cool. But what does it mean to us, and what does it mean to patients, right? That's the role that we have. We're the translators that are going to have to know what that means, how to operationalize it, how to explain it, how to use it. There's also a pretty dramatic change going on in terms of care models. The old approach and the new approach. When you think about what that looks like, it's very, very different, right? It's moving away from just going in and having a visit and letting a clinician be in charge of your information and sort of informing you on what you should do. It's really shifting quite a bit. It's shifting to relationships that are continuous, to a team-based model, to looking at evidence, not the old blue dye because Dr. So-and-so said blue dye and we've all done blue dye forever, and now we know we don't have to do blue dye anymore. And for those of you guys that have been around the block, well, how many scrubs have you ruined because of blue dye? Right? We've had blue dye on our scrubs that you can never get out. So, at any rate, this is really the new model. And this is where we really want to move to. It has to become much more transparent. It has to be evidence-based. But it's also going to be very, very accelerated in terms of how it's going to happen and our role in it. Our patients expect us to know so much more. not only about the evidence, the treatment, the therapy, the drugs, they also want us to understand the technologies. And even, can I download this app and will it talk to this app? Those aren't things that we typically know as nurses. We're gonna have to learn a lot more of this stuff. We're gonna have to be able to pivot into technology. We're gonna have to understand the impact of that. Roles are gonna continue to change. So back in 1999, I actually wrote an article about how nursing was gonna move to a free agent model. That's happening. What we've seen is that we've actually seen nurses begin to gravitate away from what I call the employer loyalty model, right? Nowadays, it's much less attractive for young people to hire on with a full-time employer. Instead, you can manage it yourself. So there are now about a dozen apps out here. This is an example of one. There are a dozen apps out here that allow nurses to build a portfolio. So you would put in your experience, your credentials, your certifications, your nursing license. It gets validated on the back end. They actually use some pretty cool AI technology. It gets validated on the back end, and essentially it's matchmaking. What it will do is it will matchmake you with hospitals, clinics, organizations that are actually looking for nurses with those same skills, competencies, and talents. So essentially, if you don't want to work full time, you can piece together as many hours a week as you want using tools like this. And there are a variety of them out there. I just actually came from San Diego, AONE, and there was an amazing tool I saw. And what they've done is they've even taken this a step farther. So they've created something that looks like an AI interface that has eliminated the need for agencies. So you essentially put in your information on the nursing part, the hospitals put it in on the back end, and it will broadcast it out to whatever region you want to go. So by eliminating the agency or the middleman, of course, everybody's still making a nice cut of change in here, but it essentially matches nurses up with organizations. So young people are like, yay, cool, if I want to work Monday through Thursday, day shift only the rest of my life, I can pick it and I can do it. That's awesome. What's the impact to the patient? What's the impact to the patient when they see a different nurse every shift, every day, all the time? What's the impact for nurses going to different organizations? You have no time for orientation in these models. You're going to read it online or on the app. You're going to understand all the policies and procedures. You're going to show up and you're going to work, right? A nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse. A hospital is not a hospital is not a hospital. So those are the things that we're going to have to figure out how to deal with. We're also seeing a rise in retail care. So we know that it's already happening at CVS, who was bought by ATHENA. We know that it's happening at Walgreens. What happens when Amazon moves it to Whole Foods, right? Or this one, please, nurses, go after this. I want nurse practitioners to start their clinics in Starbucks, right? Perfect opportunity. Think about how many there are, right? Why not do a flu clinic there? Why not do a back-to-school physical clinic there? Seriously, there's a ton of money to be made in that space, and somebody else is going to do it. Why not nurses, right? So think about this. Apple. How is Apple creeping onto the scene? What is that going to look like for us? So there are some major disruptors that are coming into care world. I will also tell you, actually a colleague of mine, Christy Henderson, was the first nurse hired by Amazon. So she was just hired in the last 6 weeks. So we don't really even know what they're going to be doing, but they're very quietly starting to acquire nurse practitioners. So think about what that model is going to look like. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of these roles. It's easy to read the hype, right? Yes, there's a lot going on. We're going to be replacing jobs. It's not always true. Some we may supplement, right? So on the list, it's kind of known as the extinction list. On the extinction list, what happened to transcriptionists? Right? Most of you guys are way too young to remember the time that a physician or a nurse practitioner would actually dictate a note. It would go to someone that wore a headset, type the note out. Usually in the morning they got 3-hole punched and put in a medical record. Well, we've iterated that a little bit, right? So physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs will call, dictate their note. It actually gets printed through kind of the EHR or supplemented right into the EHR. Those jobs are essentially gone. Monitor techs are the next one that's high on that list. So through predictive analytics, we can actually use some of these tools that scour. They can predict. They know who it is that's going to have an arrhythmia. They will also then be able to interface with smartphones, Vocera devices, other communication tools, and alert the nurse as fast or faster than the current processes. So the next on that list is monitor techs. And one of the things that you really need to think about is that the rate of adoption or the rate of change is typically only predicated on money. The rate of adoption or rate of change is predicated on money, capital. So what keeps an organization using monitor techs is that it's cheaper to employ them than to buy the system to run it, right? It's a capital equation. So when these things all become affordable, or when the capital becomes more plentifully available, that's when those roles will begin to go away. Phlebotomists, there are phlebotomy robots right now that are being trialed. So you literally can wheel it into a patient. Someone, it still takes a human, today would wheel it into a patient, and you essentially can position it properly, and the phlebotomy robots can either start an IV or draw blood. So those are being tested. Internists, there's a lot of controversy about this. I actually was at a physician panel talking about this, of course. Might I say that our physician friends are pretty sure their jobs will never be replaced or supplemented. But there are some that could be, right? So there's actually a technology called Babylon. So it is clearly not perfect and clearly not ready for prime time. But in using predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, they're actually able to get some pretty decent rates of diagnosis. Now, it isn't ready for this year or next year or maybe in the next 3 or 5 years, but it is coming. And at that point, what does that mean for the people that actually diagnose? Clinical pathologists, that's one that's probably going to move higher on the list of extinction. The reason for that is that we see less defect when we train computers through machine learning how to assess cellular abnormalities than we do through humans. So it's very likely that CPL, clinical pathologists, will go away. Same thing with radiologists. There's actually a project called Google X-ray, and it's studied for the last 3 years. It's been actually doing work around pulmonary X-rays, and they have a much, much higher rate of accuracy through the AI than people do. So think about what those roles are going to look like when those change. So I was actually in line going to a movie with a friend of mine, and ahead of us were a couple of radiologists, and we were kind of talking about something, and my friend said to one of them, so how do you feel to be in the most expensive job that's about ready to be extinct or outsourced? And they're not very happy about that, yet they all know it's coming. So what we're seeing is that in radiology world, they're developing their own AI, right? So if you're going to be replaced, you might as well get in on the creation of the software so that you make your money that way. So we're seeing a lot of those kind of shifts happening too. Nursing assistants certainly could be supplemented by robots. I don't see those jobs being replaced just because there are too many nuances, right? Nursing, in my opinion, not even on the list, not even close to the list, for a variety of reasons. We know that there's a very strong emotional connection that can't be replaced, but also the things that nurses do, there are too many of them. We don't sit at a bench all day, every day, looking at cells. We do a million different things. So right now, our job is probably the most protected out there. So take advantage of that and do really good things with it going forward. Here's some other opportunities for us as we think about innovation. So social innovation, there's actually a huge area of study called social innovation, which is very, very neat. And it's really around thinking about new ways that we might problem solve, typically using a collaborative problem solving approach. Inequity, disparity, social determinants. Again, in my opinion, these are things that we should be leaning into heavily in nursing. There is no group of professionals better prepared than nurses. in terms of public health and understanding what it is from a holistic care perspective we can do to make sure that populations are healthier. So this is one that I feel like we really have an opportunity to run faster at while others don't know what to do with. This is the space that we really can own very, very quickly. One of the ways that we can do that, I think, is by truly understanding how we can better design processes, right? I cannot do justice to design thinking in 1 minute, but I encourage you to look at a couple of different resources. One is actually IDEO.com. Thank you. IDEO. So if you go through that, there's a lot of opportunity to dig into this model, and there's 5 steps to it. So I would say spend some time on Coursera, if you're not familiar with that, to look at design thinking. Spend some time on the IDEO website, and really learn what you can about design thinking, because it should influence how we practice as nurses. This is also another model that's a really great resource, innovatorscompass.org. It's a great source. And they have another model, very, very similar to the 5-step IDEO model, starting with the who's involved, what's happening and why, what matters, and then begin to talk about ideas and experiments or rapid cycle change kind of processes and iterations. This is the step where we really do want nurses to engage and understand so we can change social determinants or improve access and improve quality. So here's my challenge to you guys. As I talk around the country, people quite often ask me, what are nursing schools doing to redesign things, right? So I would push hard on you. As students, you certainly are frontline users that have a lot of feedback that can help to shape what it looks like in the future. Does it have to look the way it is? Do clinical hours have to be the way they are? Does the licensing exam have to be the way it is? I think there are a lot of things that we feel like we're just stuck with. And we do move slowly. We move very slowly, but that's gonna have to change if we wanna move this along. So I think you guys as the key stakeholders really have an opportunity here to shape nursing education. Not only what it looks like for undergrads, but graduates as we continue to move forward on that as well. And then think about what it looks like from an employer perspective, right? Employers quite often don't understand the impact of the technology. They might be interested in buying a new HR, they might be interested in buying predictive analytics, they might not understand what that looks like when it impacts everyone along that cycle. How do you educate? How do you keep people current? I've actually seen older nurses quit and retire because they felt the EHR kicked their butt. I've seen surgeons retire because the EHR kicked their butt, right? Knowing that we have a workforce gap, a shortage of soon to be 1 million people, we gotta figure out how we can leverage technology and use it more as our friend. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to think about how that shapes the existing and emerging workforce. So my challenge to you guys is think about how you can adopt change to innovate. So you start tomorrow, you start small, you do one little thing at a time that's different. It's kind of changing behaviors and changing practice models. When it doesn't work, you just do it differently. That's what we call iteration, right? I was actually riding a Lime scooter the other day, and one of my friends, I was at AONE, so there were a whole bunch of ANA people. We were out for dinner. We were waiting for an Uber. It was taking forever, so I'm like, I'm jumping on a scooter. So I jumped on the scooter, and she's like, you really are an innovator. I was like, this is not one of those fail fast things, so don't jinx me. I'm not riding a scooter. But you gotta be willing to put yourself out there and do things differently. What's really interesting and what's becoming certainly much more in vogue right now is to keep a fail diary or a fail resume. Because you have to be able to highlight the things that you fail. Otherwise, you're not willing to put yourself out there next time. So I went and visited Google a couple of years ago, and they spend as much time and money to celebrate epic failure as they do success. And the reason they do that is because if they only celebrated success, it would be hard for people to be willing to do different things. But they celebrate failure as well. Now in healthcare, when we talk about failure, we never want to jeopardize safety or jeopardize patients, but there are a lot of things that we can do that might fail, and that's okay. And in nursing, we're not always friendly to each other when we fail. We remind each other that we've tried that before and it didn't work last time and it isn't going to work this time. We need to not do that. We need to encourage each other to fail, and that's a good thing. So next time somebody fails, we want you to say, way to go, good failure. All right, this really is the opportunity, I think, that we have as nurses to truly step up and lean into this space. Not only as it pertains to kind of technology and gizmos, gadgets, devices, but also how it pertains to models of care and how we influence things like patient education, social determinants. Think about the impact that you guys can make on that. Inequity, disparities. These are really the pieces where we can step up and be different. We're very, very different than our counterparts. We're very different than all the other disciplines. So it's a great opportunity for us to step up and to lean in. And as I said last week, we did a press conference last Tuesday for the release of Nursing Now in the United States. Don't wait to be invited. I'm giving you all permission to muscle your way in, to lean in, and to lead. This is what nurses do, right? So this is your chance. I want all you guys and encourage all of you to do that. So let's make a difference in the world and really do cool stuff. All right, you guys are awesome. You guys are awesome. All right, if you guys have questions, we have some mics out there.
Bonnie, thank you. I'm going to be the next speaker, so you're tough to follow. Take a deep breath. Bonnie, you'll recall a book called Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, which came out about 40 years ago. And you'll remember that Toffler says the future is going to be both high-tech and high-touch. So could you talk a little bit about the enduring importance in nursing of clinical touch?
Yeah, good question. So I'm actually working on kind of the next iteration of a presentation as well, because I get asked that kind of a lot. I think what the nurses of the future, and I mean really of the next couple of years going forward, look like, is that there's going to be a combination of how we look and feel and what we do, right? So if you think about it, we're going to have to understand technology. I see a revolt on the horizon with EHR. I see people not being willing. It's such a cumbersome system that was not designed around end users. It was designed around products. So I see a revolt coming in that space. And we're going to have to use it because it truly does make the most sense. We can't go back to paper, right? So what does it look like in a world where you have more technology? I think we're going to go to things like Google Glass and natural language processing, where we speak what we see and it's just going to upload and go right to an EHR. And I think that nurses and physicians and therapists, there is going to be a revolt. People are going to say, no more, right? We are seeing physician suicide increase, and one of the primary reasons is documentation burden. That's not okay. We're seeing it start to happen with nurses. So nursing suicide is beginning to increase. We're seeing nurses getting out of the profession because of clinical documentation issues. Not okay, right? So I think that's going to be pivotal, and we're really going to see some force change there. What's important to us is that, you know, it goes back to a very, very passé old model to talk about the fact that the nurses really spend more time with the patients and the family, and we're very compassionate, and we do have high touch. Most of us are wired that way, and that was what attracted us to this profession, right? I think it's important to remind ourselves, and even young people who are going to be attracted more so by the technology, I think we're going to have to remember that our role will always be the translator. We're the most important key in that. There are 4 million nurses. That means there are 4 times as many nurses as physicians. There are 8 times as many nurses as pharmacists. We are always going to be the translator and the bridge. Our job is to force our profession to rise to that equation and learn more about the technology and how it works and what it does. We don't want to be robotized. That's not what any of us want to happen. So thank you. That's a good question. And that's really a pretty deep question too. Probably better over beer.
Other questions? Raise your hand. I'll come to you. Yes.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. That was a wonderful presentation. I have a question just about the clinical validity piece of so many of these technologies that are out, with over 700 health apps now available to us. And for our students, learning about the technology is one thing, but learning the evidence behind it is another. And how do we get to that, to fill that gap when so many of these technologies right now aren't clinically validated?
Well, and that's a really good point. So many of them don't even have evidence behind them. So I think when the place to start is to see everything that's out there and then continue to filter those that truly aren't evidence-based. There are so many that are actually a solution without a problem, right? So I think you have to get rid of those. And then really try to figure out what are the ones that make sense. When you continue to filter the number of apps that are out there, those that aren't evidence-based or science-based, those that actually have interoperability issues, there are truly very, very few that kind of still stay on the table and that work. But our challenge, I would even say, is the inverse. I want 700. I want 700 that work. I want 700 that are good. I want 700 choices to make. So we're going to have to figure out how to bring the science up. The other thing that we're very, very good in healthcare is we're good at goaltending, right? We want to say these aren't legit because there's no science, yet there's not always willing to have research behind them, and we're not willing to step up and do that. So we goaltend a lot, and I think we need not to do that because the other thing that's going to happen is healthcare is going to be disrupted whether we want it or not. So we're going to have to be better fiduciaries of that process and enable it to happen instead of continually protecting it from happening.
Thank you, Dr. Cabrera. That was an excellent talk. I'm just commenting on your, when you mentioned about the patients want continuous relationships. And we're seeing now in practice, especially in primary care and some of the outpatient practices where, the portals and emails, so patients are writing long emails, their differential diagnosis, they're walking through their symptoms, and they don't want to come in because co-pays and things like that. Providers are really struggling, nurse practitioners, as far as, the time. So I'm just wondering, where do you see that going, or have you heard anything about in terms of where that might go in the future? Because I think that there's going to be that tipping point, for providers. Patients seem right now to be getting the benefit of that because providers have to answer via the emails, and it's about patient satisfaction. They get rated on that too. So just respond.
Well, I think it depends on how you define relationship, right? Relationship doesn't mean it's between me and a human that I walk into and see in person, right? Relationship could be me and the person on the other end of my email. Relationship could be, I like to use the same virtual care app, right? That's a relationship. So I think it's really defined very, very differently. There's actually some neat study work being done around prenatal visits through apps. So those patients would absolutely say they have a relationship with their phone, with that app, right? So I think that we're going to have to look at how we use the term relationship. It's going to change.
Thank you so much. It's amazing presentations, amazing new technology. So my question is when we observe, we are doing research in many hospitals and systems, we still see many, even though we have really new technologies used, but many systems still use very traditional way, for example, like handwriting for health records and scan. So I see there is a big gap, like a new technology there, but for hospital system or physician nurses hesitate to use. So what's your perspective?
I think there's going to continue to be a gap. A lot of it has to do with money, right? It's really the ability to afford some of those things. For me, when people email me from an external location, I can tell how innovative or up-to-date their organization is. Usually there's one thing that draws my attention. If you still give me a fax number in your footer, it's interesting because I know you're not a very innovative organization, right? Who does that anymore except in healthcare? So yeah, there's going to continue to be a gap.
question for those that are getting ready to graduate soon. You said to lean in and don't wait for an invitation. What would your advice be for the new grad nurses who will be just starting their first nursing job and how to really get their foot in right out the door?
Okay, so maybe wait to lean in until after orientation. Yeah, you know, you need to get your first job, right? You need to get your, you need to be a fledgling. You need to kind of learn to fly and do your thing. But then you guys, you have so much in your head that other people want out, right? So there's opportunities. This is only the start of it. So you get your bachelor's, you have to go back to school nowadays, right? That's, in nursing, in my opinion, that's not even a choice. You really have to do that. And you have to figure out a couple things. You have to figure out how to give back, right? That means back to the profession. We need help. We need you guys to help us advance and grow. So that's essential. The other thing that I think is really important is don't just talk to nurses. So for me, when I speak, I like to do at least 25% of the things I speak about outside of healthcare. Because the more we talk to ourselves, we are legends in our own minds. You have to get outside of nursing. So we want to talk to not only physicians and other healthcare groups, investment groups, other kinds of folks that want to hear what nurses have to say. And there are a couple really cool ways to do that. If you guys go out to nobc.org, nursesonboardscoalition.org, every single one of you should fill out a profile to be on a board. Because what they're looking for is they're looking for information about workflows or insight or patient thoughts, education, tips, tricks. They want what's inside a nurse's brain on a variety of boards. They're tech boards, they're finance boards, they're all kinds of boards. But nurses, this is really our chance to step up, not just in healthcare, but nurses are doing everything. Nurses are architects, they're designers, they're tech people, data scientists, informaticists, CEOs, startups, entrepreneurs. Do it. This is the baseline of an amazing skill set that you can use in anything that you do. So, way to tee that up for me, but yeah, that was a great question.
Other questions? Do I see any other hands? Thank you, Dr. Clever, so much.